I grew up in the east coast of Canada and Nova Scotia. Lacrosse wasn't a popular sport in the Atlantic provinces at that time. I know it's certainly rapidly growing right now. As a hockey player, and hockey was the go-to sport in Nova Scotia, it's one of those sports that people knew of, and certainly growing up in the 80s, Gretzky was, the guy to watch in hockey certainly, but I think a lot of people knew that he played lacrosse in the summer. Probably more lacrosse than hockey. And that's probably how the game of hockey's changed quite significantly over the recent years.
It's something a lot of people don't know. It actually was Canadians' national sport, and now it's hockey is the national Canadian sport for winter, and lacrosse is the national Canadian sport for summer. So obviously, a lot of heritage going back to Canadians way back in the day playing, and it's similar to hockey, and I think you kind of play both. As you grow up, you play hockey in the winter, lacrosse in the summer, and it's something that's just grown. I think continue to grow.
I think that the native side of things is obviously very interesting because, like you kind of said, you have reserves pocketed all over the place, but not every reserve has lacrosse, even though lacrosse itself is regarded as the medicine game. And I think everybody at this point kind of knows that, especially with how well-spoken a lot of native lacrosse players are in the lacrosse realm now. But Six Nations themselves are probably one of the largest embodying lacrosse hotbeds, and let's use them specifically. They have lacrosse teams, Six Nations, they have lacrosse all within their community. Like I said, not everyone's like that, but you don't necessarily have to be a part of an organization to enjoy lacrosse as a Native American. It's really just integrated into your bloodstream.
And I think the homage to the Native component or roots is probably more prevalent in Canada than maybe in the US.
I would say the medicine game is, in my point of view, I think of it as a healing game. You don't want to play this game to hurt people. You don't want to play this game to injure. You want to play this game with a clear mind, and you want to be in the present while you're playing this game.
Growing up in Sarnia, it's not the lacrosse hotbed of the world. Playing lacrosse more so for the fun of it, not really. It was competitive, but there was no real aspiration, obviously, until we got a little older. But it was primarily hockey.
Growing up in Whitby and played right up until grade 10, grade 11, and then you got to kind of choose. And for me, I wasn't really good at hockey, so it was an easy decision. But that was kind of how I played out.
I feel like those aren't the stories that everybody hears, though. I feel like you're the hockey connoisseur, like
I don't know about that.
The Wayne Gretzky of Whitby.
No, the Schwab. No.
For me, I started when I was 3 years old. I feel like when I do a lot of camps and clinics, a lot of people are shocked that I started so young. I feel like a lot of people kind of start when they're around maybe 8 to 12. So I definitely got a head start there, so I have to thank my dad for that one.
So I think I started playing indoor lacrosse in house league when I was 6, and then I started playing field, I think 8, 9.
That's early. I think I was at least in high school. I want to say high school before I started playing field lacrosse.
Speaking personally, I think the only reason I really got into it and played more is because of potential scholarship opportunities, potential college opportunities. For me, it's all box dominant, and then field is kind of a way to get that education, get that scholarship. So it became more, I guess, prevalent as we got older in the scene, but for me it was always kind of box first and foremost.
I feel like most people didn't really, Canadians at least, you were either playing because you enjoyed playing with your buddies, or you wanted to play collegiately.
I think high school, especially when I was in high school, it was a little tougher kind of get guys to join. I think, for us really there wasn't, really any tryouts. We kind of just took, 20 guys on a team, and I think you saw it throughout each team. You'd have, maybe a handful, 4 or 5 guys that were really good players, played club lacrosse, played, rep. Then the other 15 or so typically would kind of just fill in or kind of new to the games.
The 3 of us Ontario guys, we all went to school together, and Ontario, more so Southern Ontario, is kind of the hotbed for lacrosse, box lacrosse, field lacrosse. 3 of us were lucky enough to go to the Hill Academy, where we traveled to the States a lot. Again, made great friendships. That just inner competition. And really grew our games.
Until the Hill really came along, there wasn't really that school that was predominantly a sport powerhouse. The Hill Academy itself, like obviously we went there for a reason. We thought that it was a chance to go play collegiately. But I think that when Canadians think of the ultimate high school lacrosse, it's the Hill Academy.
They have the ability to fund it and really expose their players to the what could be, which is college lacrosse.
I think there's 4 players in the MLL. 4 of the 6 teams have a number 45. I'm wearing number 45 for that reason. I know Brian's wore that number in the past. Again, long story short, it's kind of a legacy thing. It's honoring a player that is no longer with us. It's a laundry list of players that kind of wear 45 across the professional leagues to carry on his legacy.
I used to play against Riley growing up every year, field, box. Not so much against these guys. I remember you from Sarnia when we would play Sarnia the odd time. But I hated Riley, no offense. and we can look back on it now and laugh, but I really didn't like him, and we ended up both at the Hill at the same year, and I was really set on not making friends with Riley. And the Big Bear warmed up to me, so broke the wall down, but yeah, only took about a few days once we got to the Hill to become pretty good friends.
And I remember going against him, and I hated him. Hated playing against him. He was just like feisty, like always on your hands, like slashing me. We had a nice little battle then, and even like Colsey was saying about Riley, like I was like hesitant first kind of meeting Kyle just because that like little time we battled against each other, and then get to know him, and he's obviously an outstanding guy.
I remember playing against Mark, I think from Pee Wee up, because he's a year older than me. So I got to play against him every other year, and he played for Whitby. I obviously played for Six Nations, so we would butt heads a lot in like those qualifiers or provincial matchups, and he'd probably have like 5 goals or 3 assists, just light us up. But we've known of each other for a long time, and we've played against each other for a long time, and he was always somebody you had to keep an eye on, and you still have to because he's pretty slick in there.
First off, I like to hear that from Randy. That's awesome to hear. He's one of the best players in the world right now. So, and he's the type of guy, we had it in, growing up. We would always, competitive teams. It was kind of us versus them pretty much every year for the championship for the most part. He played for Six Nations, I played for Whitby, and it was just a battle every single year.
Specifically in relation to Major League Lacrosse, I think you're seeing even more Canadians come into the fold. More and more Canadians are playing in U.S. colleges and being, the many top profile players coming out of the NCAA.
Just in general, Division I lacrosse is kind of the pinnacle of lacrosse. It's what kids grow up. They pick schools, and they're kind of diehard college fans. So for us, my dad went to NC State, played in the ACC. It's something I always wanted to do. So for me, getting recruited, is between Virginia's, North Carolina, Duke. Those were kind of my top choices. And at the end of the day, we want good education, good lacrosse, big time athletics, and I think the United States offers that a little bit more than the Canadian programs back home.
Growing up, you don't watch university sports on TV or anything. If you're watching something and you're a lacrosse player growing up like we did, you'd find a way to somehow stream ESPN illegally, if possible, to watch an NCAA championship.
A guy like Mark Cochran has paved the way for more Canadians to go to Virginia. Using the sport of lacrosse to get a great education and to meet people and play. Again, that kind of lacrosse experience is pretty remarkable.
For me, I think the guy was always Cody Jamieson, and I don't just say that because I play with him currently, but for me to go and drive to, let's say like a Whitby, for example, and watch a lacrosse game there, that was like a 4.5 hour drive for me to get there. And so Cody was always somebody that Six Nations was a 2 hour drive for me. If my dad and I wanted to go watch a junior game that night, that was the closest place that we could go. And obviously I wasn't online when I was 8 years old watching highlight tapes. It just wasn't a thing. So for me, going and actually watching the Six Nations Arrows play, Cody was always that player who was just obviously far greater than everybody else. And even Randy was on some of those teams too, where you were just watching those guys and you're like, I literally can't believe the things that they're doing.
I remember watching Mark Matthews and Shane play, and guys like Jason Noble, or both Nobles, I guess. And yeah, no, it's everywhere, and the players that have gone up ahead of us that are still playing. It's pretty interesting to look back at how good they are, and the way that they've paved for us.
John Grant Jr., John Tavares, who is the all-time points leader and goal scoring kind of record holder, Gary Gate, and then a couple guys I grew up watching in specific would be Colin Doyle and Josh Sanderson. So for me, some of those box lacrosse kind of elite players when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, those are the guys that I watched.
Colin Doyle was definitely one of them. He played out west in Coquitlam, but also I grew up watching like Ben McIntosh at a very young age and Robert Church, and they had a dynasty. I don't think they lost in minor lacrosse from when they were 6 to when they went into junior.
I think for me, being my age, I think John Grant Jr. was one of the guys really that I looked up to playing. He was one of the guys where the highlight tapes first came out. He started playing the MLL its first season back in the early 2000s. So for John Grant Jr., watching his highlight tapes growing up, he was unbelievable. And I mean, he's still out there playing. At 44 years old, whatever it is now, he's unbelievable.
It's ironic how small this lacrosse world is. You end up, either getting coached by these guys or have the opportunity to play with them. So it's been pretty cool. We grew up playing against the Richies.
Yeah.
Ryan and what's his brother's name?
Brett and Nick.
No, the Richies. I know them, but the Stromes.
Oh.
Ryan and
Dylan.
Strome. There were a fair amount of guys that, like we said, you kind of play lacrosse and hockey, and then at that 14, 15 age range, you kind of have to make a decision. And for a lot of us, it was probably easier to pick lacrosse, but some of those guys go on to do some pretty special things in the NHL, and it's great watching those guys do it.
Playing the box game has really transitioned to another growth opportunity inside the field game, and there's a skill set that we're seeing that the Canadian players emphasize, and it's being able to move in tight spaces or quicker ball movement, and adjusting in certain situations where it might not be as tactical.
Box is an intense physical game where it's a lot of battles and it gets heated a lot, but as you get older you get to know guys a little more, and it's pretty cool the relationships you can make.
Well, it's also interesting when you play against each other in a junior A game, and then the next day you go to school together. So you're playing against each other. There's people that are fighting on opposite teams that are your buddies, but they're fighting your other buddy. And then you got to go to school the next day and still kind of like hang out with that same group of people that you were just literally going to battle against.
It doesn't mean Canadians are tougher than Americans, although that'd be a great debate to have amongst our teammates on the Cannon.
My first fight in box, and it was first Minto, and ended up fighting this guy named Brad Cree, who fast forward 4 years later, I'm playing on the same team with him in the NLL, and I've lived with him now for 3 or 4 years.
Like any mother watching would say, you're absolutely not playing this sport if they watch it, because some of the stuff is violent and you don't get away with it today like they did. But
That's what it
it
is.
is.
Game.
There's a tremendous element of the box game that we look at, and the dynamic of the toughness factor, I think, is an interesting one.
We always tell people you can't really judge professional lacrosse just on what you see on TV. You've got to go to a game for yourself, because the dynamic inside the arena is so much different. And you can go to an NHL game and you can enjoy it and you can see your 3 goals, and that's great, and there's phenomenal athletes that are playing. But when you go to a professional lacrosse game, from the moment you get out of your car until the moment you get back in it, there's something happening, whether it's some festival outside or music playing throughout the whole course of a game, or hits happening 24/7. Like, there's so much happening within the confines of that small little rink that when a fan leaves, they want more. And if you just watch on TV, you don't really get that sense of it.
My dad was kind of one of the first people that started along with the Gates, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and progressively, it's gotten into, especially the last decade or so. Now there's hundreds of Canadians playing, Division 1 to Division 3 every single year, and Division 1 All-Americans. So it's definitely grown a lot, and it's a huge part of Canadian culture.
The Gate brothers, they were kind of those people that were getting dealt to different teams so that people could go see them play in person. And if they were in Albany, or if they were in Syracuse, or if they were in Toronto, finding different ways to get them in Washington, wherever, so that people could go see them and really expand the game to everybody. Not just, okay, they play in this location and that's really where they're going to be for the rest of their career. They were getting dealt different places so that people could see the Gate brothers in action.
I guess before it was a little more meat and potatoes, a little more fundamental of like picking up the ground ball and really shooting it into the net kind of thing. And these guys came along and, you know, like you said, the air gate and they're throwing behind the backs and around the worlds and put a little bit more flash into the game where like revolutionized it, but really just opened people's eyes up to this can be done in so many ways. And I think that's the great part about the game.
They put some flair to it, and they're just magicians out there.
Another thing about my dad, he scored the double overtime game winner when U.S. played Canada back in 1978. So that's a moment that, you know, I know I'll never forget in Canadian lacrosse history. Never forgets. I know they have the picture right now in their Hall of Fame back in Canada. I actually have the original in my basement right now of him scoring the goal. So that's a moment that'll stick with us forever.
We've had a lot of success in Boston through building our team and roster and family with many Canadian players, and that has really not a lot to do with my roots. It's certainly to do with our coaches' leadership and understanding the talent that's in the game.
For us, we're living out our dreams, being almost full-time lacrosse players, where we play NLL in the winter months and then we play MLL in the summer, and you can make a living playing full-time lacrosse, which is really, really cool to see. The work of social media and things like that, to see how big it's becoming and how fast it's growing, and all of that is really remarkable to see.
I think the game and the clip of how fast people are going to start to take on the game at the youth level, high school level, and even college level, both in Canada and in the US, there's going to be a wave.
Canadian lacrosse is definitely, you know, on the upswing. I think every year, you know, year over year, you're seeing more kids play, more kids love the sport. I think, you know, having, you know, professionally, you know, the professional lacrosse leagues, more exposure to the game. College has been growing. I think more kids are just falling in love with it, and you see that, you know, I could be walking around, you know, my hometown and see kids with lacrosse sticks playing or playing wall ball. I think, actually, my dad actually runs Ontario Lacrosse, so just, you know, kind of having conversations with him, you know, it's definitely growing, and it's been one of the fastest growing sports on the world for a long time now. And I think it continues on the way that's going, which I think that it will. I think it's going to be a really big sport in the near future.
The passion for our game amongst the people who are fans and athletes inside our game is unmatched.
The sport is growing, and there's so many talented players out there, and again, we could talk all day about things, but one really cool thing is every single guy here is really involved in the sport, right? And coaching high school, running camps on our own, running the rock facility.
I have a lot of friends, their kids who are, you know, coming up now, they're starting to pick up a stick. Many of our players are, you know, at the root of that and making that happen and making it popular, and I think that that's really exciting for our game as a whole.
We're all kind of involved, and again, trying our best to do our part in growing the game.
There are so many lacrosse athletes that want this game to be a tremendous success at every level, whether it's youth, high school, college, professionally. They want it to become big time, and it will. It's just it needs to continue to grow, and we're going to take it there.
A little kid in Halifax, I guarantee, is a huge Boston Cannons fan because of being coached by him every day. And the same can go for Toronto and Oakville at the high school level. So again, these guys are amazing people and role models and great players, and kids look up to them. I know, so like we talked about our favorite players, it was the same for me. You aspire to get to that level one day and be that player. So again, it's all about paving the way, leaving the place a little bit better than you found it. So I think the sport's in good hands with, again, guys like this.